transition us into the formal part of our presentation this morning is you have listened in to a conversation among friends. I hope it has warmed your heart. I suspect even if you don't know the people that have been talking well, it probably sounds familiar to conversations that you have as well. So my name is Matt Cook. I am the director of the Center for Healthy Churches, and I'd like to welcome you to the Changing Church webinar. This webinar is designed to ask and answer good questions for ministers and congregations about how we respond to this highly adaptive moment in the life of the church. I want to thank all of the organizations that help make this webinar a reality. We are always grateful for the good work of New Matrix. Jim Kitchens and Deborah Wright, their co-principals, are on with us this morning, and one of their team, and also one of our team, is our speaker. I'll circle back to her in just a moment, but Jim and Deborah, we're always glad to have you on. We're grateful for the good work of the Presbyterian Foundation. Paul Greer, their vice president, is on with us today. We're grateful for the good work of the Church Network, for Truett Seminary and the Truett Church Network, for Gardner Webb Divinity School, for Baptist News Global, and for the Lex Center for Faith and Giving, all of whom church-facing organizations trying to resource ministers and congregations. So we're grateful for their partnership. So last week, and I think I saw Guy Sales log on. Last week, Guy Sales started us off with a bang, or maybe with a gentle whisper. Maybe that's a better way to say it, a gentle whisper of wisdom into this series about how do you put your foot on the gas when the tank is empty. One of the conversations that a lot of us are having is a lot of us are still dealing with the spiritual, emotional, and even physical after effects of the pandemic, not to mention all of the other challenges, cultural challenges that are kind of bedeviling us in some ways. So it's not as if we are, raring and ready to go. And yet our congregations, many of our congregations have this hope and expectation that not only will we get back to normal, but maybe we'll do even more than we normally did in order to pull everybody back in, which creates an interesting mental, spiritual dilemma for ministers. So last week and today, and for 2 more weeks, we're going to have some individuals answer that question for us. What do you do when that's the dilemma that's in front of you? My friend and colleague, Ayana Teter, is with us today. She is the Associate Dean of Students and Formation at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. She is also a consultant with New Matrix and with the Center for Healthy Churches. She's a wonderful individual with a lot of wonderful things to say, who is in a wonderful place. I think she's going to talk a little bit about that, the irony of where she is at the moment as she answers this question for us. So Ayana, welcome. It's so good to have you. Good to see you. And let me turn the baton over to you to get us started this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Thanks everyone for being here. As I shared with Matt and Jim before you all logged on, I'm currently on retreat. I am in the leaf-peeping forest of southwestern Pennsylvania. I'm at a little bed and breakfast that my kids say are giving medieval castle vibes. And I'm here with my dear friend and prayer partner of the last 20 years. We met in seminary and started praying together in seminary. And with only a few exceptions, we have been praying together every week for almost the last 20 years. At one point, we were talking in this crazy COVID season about kind of going away. And I said to her, I have never been away on retreat by myself, not for work, without my family, ever. And she was like, we got to fix that. I know, Paul, I see you saying, wow. Yeah, right? And so I think it says something that after nearly 20 years of ministry, I haven't done that. I think that should be part of this testimony today. I also think it says something that in the midst of it, I'm pausing to share with you, my siblings, a little bit about what I'm seeing and what I'm learning, right? And so with that kind of preamble, I'm logged into my phone here. So just in case, country Wi-Fi goes out, you should still have my voice. So somebody give me a thumbs up, or somebody that's got my cell, text me if I go dark here, okay? But I just kind of wanted to start the conversation, when Matt shared the theme, and I was thinking, some of this is personal testimony today, saints. These last 2 years for me personally have been just really difficult. In addition to all of it, right? And no matter where you are on the political spectrum, in dealing with COVID, with the racial justice reckoning, kind of no matter where you are, there's been all of that. And my institution went through a massive restructuring that reorganized the work that we had specifically in my office. And not related to COVID, I lost my father. That was the first kind of major loss, right, for me. And my husband took a new church, which was a big transition in our life. And right before the pandemic started, I had started a doctoral program. With kind of all those good intentions. Oh, these next 2 years are going to be focused on, right? And then the pandemic. And so when I think about, when I saw that image, really, I loved that image that Matt put up, of a car speeding down the highway. How do you keep going when your tank is empty? It just really resonated with me. And I thought, I hope I have a few things to share today. And so I just really want to start by sharing with you a brief scripture. And I'm going to try not to make this all like Bible study-y, right? We have Holy Eucharist during this time every week on my seminary campus. So I miss like 90% of these webinars because it's our once a week Holy Eucharist. So if I go way off topic, Matt, you'll rein me back, right? You'll text me and rein me back. Okay. So I know we don't really do Bible study here, but I just want to start with a scripture. The New Living Translation of Mark chapter 2, verses 27, where our Lord Jesus Christ says to us, "The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath." Let me say that again. The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people. And the first kind of question I would just kind of lay out there to frame, kind of what I'm going to talk about today is like, do you know what we need? Do you know what people need? It's rhetorical. You don't have to like unmute and answer. But I'm really inviting you to just kind of sit with that question for a minute and what do you need as a clergy person, as a Christian leader? What are the needs that you have had that God has created you to need? What are the things that are requirements for you to be able to journey through this life and like be faithful and proclaim the gospel and meet people where they are, right? I would propose that one of those things is Sabbath, as Jesus says to us in this passage. But this is not a talk about Sabbath. I would propose that rest, though, giving yourself permission for that rest, being attentive to our finitude, is one of the things that makes it possible for us to do something different, which is to accompany people spiritually on this journey and to have that kind of accompaniment ourselves. I'm going to recommend 2 books to you. The first one is 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. Now, has anyone read that, heard of it? Okay, Guy. Don't get caught up in the subtitle, Time Management for Mortals. But this book is one of these books that I'm commending to everyone. And I think it's a good example of the kind of shifts that we need to make in this post-COVID time. The premise is that, like, if you live a good, long, rich life, you got 4,000 weeks. You got 4,000 weeks. what are you doing with them? And are you recognizing the limits that you have within that time, within these 4,000 weeks? The author, it's Oliver Burkeman, for those who are going to Google that right now and put it in your Amazon cart. Oliver, his premise is that we miss the life that is really life because we're so busy. And I think that image of having our feet on the gas, trying to keep pushing, trying to keep creating and innovating and maintaining and restoring and recultivating these spaces in our congregations and in our communities and people's lives. We are finite beings created to only really be able to do that in the midst of like deep rest, deep connection to the one that created us, deep restorative rest. And so a couple of examples from Jesus, some stories of examples that I see of Jesus engaging in rest, engaging in that life that is really life, and the fruit that comes out of that. And then kind of how we can not only imitate that and receive that in our lives, but how we can think about that on behalf of our people. My topic here is really like spiritual direction, right? You may have heard of this. I'm Presbyterian by birth and foreordaining. I'm sorry, I had to throw that in there. But this is not really this is not super our tradition, right? This is kind of one of our historic Christian practices, though, that I think we need to reclaim. I know that my evangelical brothers and sisters, some of our Baptist brothers and sisters, we talk about kind of accountability partners. Are we still using that language, like accountability partners? Nobody's shaking their heads. Well, one of you shaking your head. So kind of folks that are on the journey with you, in some ways keeping your feet to the fire and holding up a mirror to you so that you can see yourself. When I'm talking about spiritual direction, I'm not talking about that exactly. I'm talking about this historic tradition, right? That's coming out of Africa, right? Anthony the Great, one of the desert fathers and mothers, who kind of is known as the founder of monasticism, one of the founders of monasticism. He kind of talked about the need for us to journey together with one another, focusing really on our inner sin, right? That was that kind of early historic kind of thought that went around that. But an opportunity for us to together, right? Like in fellowship, brothers, Anthony the Great is talking about meditating on scripture, meditating on that inner life and our inner spirituality. As the church grows, though, right, we get into, you've heard of the Irish concept of the soul friend, right? The person who is journeying with you. This is a central feature in early Celtic Christian life. The idea of having a soul friend that is going to journey with you throughout wherever God is calling you to go. As the church spreads through Europe, right, and people start living in communal life, you get Benedict of Nursia talking about this same kind of thing, where you have these intentional relationships that are about growing you towards God, okay? Really focused on pointing you towards God in your life. And, there's lots of Europeans that I can list for you ancient and modern names that you all will probably know: Thomas Cranmer, John Wesley, Henry Nouwen, Thomas Merton. But there are modern Africans and African Americans who are also doing this kind of soul friendship, spiritual accompaniment, spiritual friendship kind of work. I would commend to you another book. You don't have to buy a bunch of books. You're not going to read them. We're all too tired. But just look it up, keep it in your cart, right? Embodied Spirits, Stories of Spiritual Directors of Color. That'll be a good reference for you. Sherry Bryant Johnson is in there. Loretta Coleman Brown is in there. Sophia Park. And so there are, this is an ancient practice, an ancient feature, right, of what it means to be on the Christian journey, that we have ancient, medieval European examples of, modern African American, Asian American examples of, right? Folks making this journey one to another, walking with one another in intentional ways. Okay, here's my examples from Jesus. I would commend to you John 4. I'm not going to read most of any of these, right? But John 4, Jesus with the woman at the well. John 3, Mark 10, Jesus' encounter with the rich young man. Luke 24, the walk to Emmaus. And let me kind of lift up for you what I see some of what Jesus does in these encounters, the way he's able to be present with people, which is, I think, what we are called and invited to both be and do, right? As people who can kind of be a part of these spiritual friendships. So take the woman at the well. Jesus there, he's tired. If you recall that, I know every one of you's preached on this like a dozen times, right? Remember that Jesus is tired when he stops. This is what the word records. And so he is exhausted from being on a journey. A woman approaches him, and he is prepared to initiate a relationship with her, despite the need to transcend the boundaries of the day, right? So he asks her for something to drink. He asks her for something to drink. And she responds in, kind of where she's at in life. You're asking me for something? What are you asking me for? And Jesus says to her, if you knew who is talking to you, you would have asked me for living water, and I would have given it to you. And you know the story, like she's drawn in, and he stays right with her and engages. He says to her some things about her life. She understands this is prophetic, and she's right there ready to engage him. This is like what I would say, and another book I would commend to you, Sue Pickering, The Art and Practice of Spiritual Direction. I will put these in the chat if any of you are really serious about getting a book, right? I love to share these books that are forming my knowledge base. I see this example of Jesus with this woman as the example of the kind of relationships that we are being invited to engage and embrace right now post-COVID. And here's some of the features of what I see in these particular kinds of relationships. One, Jesus, even in the midst of his tiredness, is prepared to be present with this other human being. He's prepared to be present. One of the things I'm seeing with pastors, with students especially, is that people are so distracted from their lives right now that it's really a struggle for folks to be present in a moment, be present in one of these 4,000 weeks. But we see in Jesus here, he's absolutely present with her. Second thing we see, he sees her. He sees her. He sees that she's a woman. He sees that she is, a person who is in need. God, he sees her history, right? And he's able to like engage her right where she is. He's ready to answer. Third thing I see, he's ready to answer questions about the kingdom and like turn every little question that she has into an opportunity to point her to the kingdom, point her to something deeper. He's patient with her. He listens to her. He's ready to challenge, but he's also ready to comfort, and offer to her like the gift of eternal life. You see that same thing with Jesus when he's walking with the disciples on the road to Emmaus. But like this is, a quick, in the like 30 minutes we have here today, example of like what it means to, the example that I see of what it means to be like present in our lives with other people, doing the work that God has called us to do. Now, what does that have to do when your deacon board is like, we have stuff to do, right? When there are elders that are like extremely anxious about attendance, and where we are with attendance. And I think a real thing that people are dealing with right now is the polarization in our congregation and kind of the fear of what's going to happen in a next election cycle. How can we keep a diversity of folks together, right? And so, like, what is this kind of being present, being alive in our own life? Being present and attentive to people. What does that have to do with having to, kind of dealing with these bigger problems that we have? Like, I would say this is a posture that we are invited to take in these days. I would commend to us as pastors and ministry leaders that if we will take this posture, and some of how we are able to do that is by participating in this kind of work with spiritual directors ourselves. So one of the things I did in the midst of all of this time, all of these stressors, is I sought out a local spiritual director to kind of help me untangle all of the things that I described to you earlier, right? Like, how do I deal with this new job and try to engage the grieving process when I'm not really being attentive to the grieving process? How do I prioritize this degree and this study, right? How do I be attentive to this new church that my husband and I are pastoring, right? How do I even begin to like take, and I described it to my spiritual director as a mountain. Like, how do I even kind of come up to this mountain, figure out what to tackle first, and even try to tackle something, right? And the process of meeting with somebody one-on-one, and I know you all have therapists, right? That's good too. But meeting on one-on-one with an individual who was particularly trained to keep pointing me back to the work of God in my life and to keep me attentive to the work of God in my life has been nothing short of transformational in these last 4-5 months. Sue Pickering, in that book I commended to you, she gives like 3 different models, and they're not all her models, but she gives like 3 different models for what it is to be one of these kind of soul friends. One of them is like a midwife to the soul. This is actually Margaret Gunther's work. To be a midwife, to be a person who is, my spiritual director is like a midwife. They're listening, watching for signs of new life, signs of growth, signs of change, signs of impending labor, right? And so it's kind of that midwife imagery that Margaret Gunther uses to name the role of spiritual director. Simon Brown uses a different metaphor of like the campfire in the wilderness, right? So someone who is there tending to the fires of the Spirit, waiting for travelers to pass, waiting with light and heat and warmth and companionship, to be able to illumine for you the things of God, and really particularly the things of the Spirit. And then Sue herself uses the metaphor, the imagery of like a bridge builder. He describes us as kind of being on a mainland of busyness, really, and in addition to other things, and that we need someone to help us build a bridge to get to that quiet, contemplative, a highly attuned attention to the Spirit, right? And so, like, these are the metaphors that folks use for some metaphors that folks use for spiritual direction. There are others, right? But what I would commend to you is that, like, this is not accidental work. This is like the key work, not the only work, but this is the key, some of the key work that we need to be about as ministry leaders, is learning how to, again, be attuned particularly to the life of the Spirit in ways that let us discover really what we need and how to be present again with people and really with God. One final story. I am convinced these days, I mean, like, I'm not in a congregation right now. I'm a parish associate at my spouse's congregation. But having served churches, having planted a church, like, I think that pastors have the hardest job, one of the hardest jobs in the world, because we are called to be holy, and then called to do everything. And so, like, I am acutely aware, like, of the pressing needs of infrastructure and systems that are facing pastors right now. But I think one of the gifts that you can give to yourself today is to set aside time. I know, I said it. To set aside time to really intentionally cultivate a relationship like that. Whether you are on the receiving end, saying, okay, I need to go find myself a spiritual director, or whether you are gonna be a person who starts practicing that. And I'm not asking you to dabble in things that you may or may not be trained in, but, like, to be a person who's gonna practice. What does it look like for me to meet my people one at a time in where they are? What does it look like for me to journey with my people one at a time, to see them when they call on me, to be present with them? And what are the kinds of things that I need to shift and change in my life in order to really be present in a moment? Okay, I'm going to stop there because I could just keep, like, repeating that theme over and over. And I see that there's something in a chat. I think Jim Kitchens asked me a question. Yeah, great question. If people are interested in connecting with the spiritual director, how do they get started? There are a couple of different networks that you can reach out to. I am a member of the Network of Spiritual Directors of Color. And I would encourage you to look there and look for folks in your area. There's also a larger network that I'm going to have to Google on my phone while I answer the next question so that I get the name right. But it's Network of Spiritual Directors in America, I think, but I'm going to have to make sure I get that right. And that's a place to start, people in your area. I would also suggest going to your nearest monastery. Thank you, Jim Kitchen, Spiritual Directors International. Going to your local, like, calling up your local Catholic church. Catholics don't have the market on this, right? But for some of us, that might be the nearest resource that we have to really point you, because I think so. I see some of our sisters practicing Catholic sisters practicing spiritual direction a little bit more, find out your nearest seminary that might be offering training in this. We have a lot of different, Numa Institute is one who are doing training for spiritual directors, and you can get a lot of free consultation that way if you're willing to let somebody practice on you. But as they practice on you, you learn as well. Yeah. I'll stop, Matt. Sorry, I went long.
No, not at all. Not at all. And rich and wonderful as always. So my first question for you is, what do you think the biggest obstacles are for pastors and ministers who recognize a need for this, and yet for whatever reason something is preventing them from taking that step? Can you name some of the things that you think prevent people from taking that step?
Yeah, I think that we are not accustomed in the American church right now. I wish you weren't recording this, because I don't know that I want this to come back to me. But I actually think we struggle with vulnerability. I think we struggle with what it means to be voluntarily vulnerable. Even though, like, when Jesus was originally sending us out, he was sending us out in vulnerability, right? Take nothing for yourself. Don't take 2 pairs of, sandals. Don't take any extra money. Go wherever you go. Eat what's set before you. Be present with those people and tell them about the kingdom. It's a posture of vulnerability and humility that we're called to go out in, and I think we really struggle with that. I think we really like to be in control of ourselves, in control of our relationships, and so I think that's one of the biggest barriers. Is at least for me, like, let me put my cards on the table, to really be vulnerable with another clergy person in a way that I'm going to allow them to really speak into what they're hearing God say for my life. That's one, a resistance to vulnerability. The second one, and again, it might just be me, but I don't think I'm alone. I think it's a trust of God. I think we struggle to trust that we belong to God, and that God has this, and that if we will rest for real on the Sabbath, starting with the night and letting it go through the whole next day, that we're gonna, not just that everything's gonna be okay, right? Not just that the church will continue to proclaim God's name, but I think we struggle with trusting that, like, we can weather the criticism, that we can weather, not innovating, not thinking up something new for that 24-hour period. So I think it's resistance to vulnerability and trust. I think.
Is the vulnerability piece, is it that we are used to being the voice of God,
Yeah.
that we are used to being the resident spirituality expert so often that it's really difficult? You think that's what's driving it for us, why we struggle with vulnerability as ministers?
Yeah, I mean, so if I'm just putting all the cards down on the table, here's what I really think. I think that we are afraid that someone might call us out from what we're already doing. I think we're afraid that Jesus might call us out from what we're doing, what we've already built, the positions and the authority that we have, and might call us out into something more radical. I think that's true. I think that we've cultivated a lot, I might be the youngest here. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, because I'm solidly middle age, pushing it and pushing it farther. But I've been in ministry for 20 years, ordained ministry for 20 years. And so I'm assuming everybody else on this call has more wisdom, more experience, more grace in God than what I've got. And yet I see us, we get to kind of a position where we are, we think we've got this figured out. And I think part of what COVID has done is like been a tremendous disruption to that, right? And I think we see our vulnerability in a new way, but we are clamoring. I see us kind of collectively clamoring to get back to that place of expertise and stability and normalcy, instead of being present to all of what God might be trying to disrupt right now.
Yeah. So I think if I'm interpreting Jim's response right here, I think Jim's kind of weighing into the conversation. Most of our boundary training has to do with sexual misconduct prevention. That's good. We need to be boundary training about protecting our personal boundaries, which I think Jim is inferring here is we are creating boundaries around our need for our own formation, for our own time for quiet and rest and rhythm. So how do we help? I think he's right about that. How do we help our churches see our need for rest and rhythm and formation as not only good for us, but good for the church and even good for them? How do we do that?
Yeah. So how many times have you heard somebody say, like, we model it for them? I don't really know how we do that beyond like showing it and living with the consequences of it and showing them that it's okay. You know, one of the things I always say, you know, I love Jesus because he sees us. And I think that a lot of times we, in service to getting a thing done or building a thing, sometimes we don't see our people. Our folks are as tired and exhausted and confused and divided as we are. They are wrestling in just the same ways that we are, with how to make space to be faithful to what God has for them, how to be good dads, and how to be faithful in their work, and you know how to contribute something to the kingdom. And so we model this for them. We show them. We tell them about our story. We tell them about our vulnerability from the pulpit with boundaries, and then in those one-on-ones that are so important. I think we show them. I think we're, as clergy, and we're not a monolith, because we're different generations, different traditions. But I think we really struggle to live into limits. That's why I commended that book to you at the beginning, 4,000 Weeks. I think we really struggle to live into limits and to say no. But I think it becomes an integrity thing. Being able to say yes to what you can say yes to and no to what you just can't do. But I've gone off topic. Sorry. I don't know if I answered your question, Matt. No,
I think you did. I mean, one of the things, I'm trying to remember if I read it or if I heard it, but one of the things that has really struck me before about the role of the minister in this question of how do we help our churches understand this is important for us, and because if we take it seriously, it's good for the church and good for them. That this person was saying that part of the role of ministry is to model both full, like our cups being full and our cups being emptied, rather than desperately trying to get just enough in our cup to exist. That both, like people are so frantic to just like, all right, I'm exhausted, and so I gotta find something that just gets me through the day. I gotta get something that just gets me through the week, and you're constantly living with your tank almost empty, and all the fear and anxiety of that being true. When in reality, part of what we have to learn to do is fill the tank all the way back up, so then we can be poured out and emptied, and that we model for our congregations what a full cup looks like, and then what it's like to be poured out. There's enough to
I like that.
Yeah.
Find out who said that or where you read that and send it to me, because right. I like that. I think that is a good, that's a good way to that's a good way to think about it. I think we have become so accustomed to, yes, through COVID, it heightened it, but I think we've become so accustomed to not being present in our own moments, that we've kind of, that franticness that you just described, that's become the way of life instead of an aberration, the aberration that it should be. And there are, tons of technological and cultural things that contribute to that, right? Other folks can talk about that. But I think that is not the life abundant that Jesus models for us. But in order to embrace the abundant life, we have to give up a lot of what we've been doing, and that's hard. It's so hard. I think hard.
Yeah.
Don't have any better words than that.
Yeah, no one's really an expert in this. We're all wounded healers to the extent that we're healers. We're all wounded,
right?
And some of us figure out how to heal with our wounds. So I think I saw that there was another comment in the chat.
Jeannie just had a great comment. Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to just read Jeannie's
and
draw it to a close. I would like to do, I think that we try to find the thing that gives us a lid on our cup to make it the next thing. That little thing becomes our idol, and after a while, idol loses its ability. That's true. So, all right, Ayana, thank you so much for the depth and richness, and I would say even the spirit in which it was offered, even like your tone and the way that you approached it felt like a balm, at least to my soul. I'll speak for myself in that way.
Amen.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And
go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna say, God sees us. God knows what He's called us to do and what we're trying to do. And just to give ourselves permission to just kind of stop and be in the presence of the one who's called us to begin with. I think it's okay for us to stop running from that. Anyway, I'm done. Thanks, Matt. Thanks.
We hope the leaves are beautiful and that the conversation is rich and that your time away fills your soul. Thank you for helping fill ours this morning. So next week, Dr. Greg Rogers will be with us to provide his own answer to this question. So excited about that. And then in 2 weeks, Jane Davis will be with us. So we're very grateful to have this wonderful lineup of very wise and insightful people to kind of share from their experience. So we hope you join us again next week as we revisit this topic. Thanks everybody for being here today. Have a great week.